More than a week has passed, and people still talk about Super Bowl 2026 and Bad Bunny's halftime show. What does the biggest American sporting event on the planet have to do with China? What does Bad Bunny's strong accent mean to the US, China, and Latin America? Why should DFTW, a channel focusing on international affairs and global geopolitics, talk about such an irrelevant topic today? On the surface, the Super Bowl is pure US culture, football, halftime shows, billion-dollar commercials, and red, white, and blue spectacle. But look closer. The jerseys are stitched through global supply chains. The advertisers are multinational brands betting on both American consumers and the Chinese markets. The chips in the cameras, the rare earths in the electronics, the EV commercials in between plays, are all connected, in some way, to the world's most important rivalry, China and the United States. So here's the real question: in 2026, when the Super Bowl kicks off, are we just watching a football game, or are we watching the latest chapter in a global power competition playing out under stadium lights? It isn't just about touchdowns. It's about life, applause, trade, technology, culture, influence, and who really owns the future. On February 8, 2026, at Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara, the Seattle Seahawks defeated the New England Patriots in a game that, on the surface, looked like a classic American spectacle: packed stadium, halftime show, military flyovers, billion-dollar commercials, and over 100 million viewers. But beneath the touchdowns and turnovers, Super Bowl 2026 quietly reflected something much bigger: the evolving relationship between China and the United States. The Seahawks' victory itself told a story of discipline and execution. Seattle controlled possession, avoided turnovers, and capitalized on New England's mistakes. Drake May threw for nearly 300 yards for the Patriots, but 2 interceptions and a costly defensive score swung the momentum. It was a game that showed how thin the margins are at the highest level: one mistake, and the narrative changes. In many ways, that mirrors the broader geopolitical dynamic between China and the US. Small shifts in policy, supply chains, technology, or public sentiment can dramatically tilt competitive advantage. Just as football games are won in the trenches, global competition increasingly happens in less glamorous arenas: semiconductor fabs, battery supply chains, AI labs, and trade agreements. The Super Bowl remains the crown jewel of American cultural exports. The NFL is not just a sports league, it is a global entertainment machine. Broadcast rights, advertising revenue, and merchandise generate billions annually. The halftime show is analyzed as intensely as the game itself. Commercials debut like movie trailers. It is capitalism, patriotism, and pop culture rolled into one Sunday night. Yet even here, China is not absent. While American football has never rivaled basketball's popularity in China, the NFL has spent years cultivating the Chinese market through streaming partnerships, social media presence, and youth programs. Chinese tech companies have previously held digital broadcasting rights, and American brands advertising during the Super Bowl often rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing and Chinese consumer markets. The irony is subtle but powerful: even America's most domestic sporting event sits inside a deeply globalized economic web. Take advertising. A 30-second Super Bowl commercial can cost over $7 million. Many of the companies paying for those slots, whether automotive, tech, apparel, or consumer electronics, depend heavily on supply chains that run through China. Even if final assembly happens elsewhere, components often trace back to Chinese factories. The chips in smart TVs broadcasting the game, the lithium-ion batteries in electric vehicles advertised during breaks, and the LED screens in the stadium all have connections to China's industrial ecosystem. Then there's the technology behind the spectacle. Modern Super Bowls are data-driven experiences. Real-time analytics, augmented reality graphics, AI-powered advertising optimization, and high-definition streaming infrastructure all rely on global semiconductor networks. The US leads in chip design, but China remains a major player in manufacturing inputs, rare earth processing, and electronic components. Strategic rivalry exists, but so does interdependence. And that's where the tension lies. In 2026, the US and China are locked in intense competition across trade, technology, military influence, and ideological models. Tariffs, export controls, and investment restrictions have reshaped supply chains. American policymakers talk about reshoring and friendshoring. Chinese policymakers emphasize self-reliance and domestic innovation. Yet on Super Bowl Sunday, the scoreboard does not reflect decoupling. It reflects entanglement. The Seahawks winning the Lombardi Trophy might symbolize American resilience and competitive spirit. But zoom out, and the broader economic system supporting the event is multinational. Even sportswear worn by players and fans often involves Chinese textile production. Even social media reactions, viral clips, and live stream discussions circulate across platforms with global server infrastructure. Sports often serve as soft power. For decades, American cultural exports, Hollywood films, pop music, fast food, and the NFL have shaped global perceptions of the United States. China, meanwhile, has invested heavily in its own soft power through film, digital platforms, infrastructure diplomacy, and global sporting events like the Olympics. The Super Bowl represents American cultural confidence. It is unapologetically loud, commercial, and patriotic. China's global strategy tends to project stability, long-term planning, and infrastructure capability. One thrives on spectacle, the other emphasizes scale. But both understand the value of narrative. In the stadium, the Patriots struggled with turnovers. 3 giveaways proved decisive. In geopolitics, strategic missteps can be just as costly. Export controls can backfire. Tariffs can raise domestic prices. Sanctions can accelerate alternative systems. The lesson from football applies globally: aggression must be calculated. Meanwhile, China watches American cultural events carefully, not just as entertainment, but as indicators of social mood and economic strength. Consumer confidence, advertising trends, corporate messaging, and even halftime themes all provide subtle signals about the direction of American society. And the US watches China just as closely. Economic growth rates, industrial output, tech breakthroughs, and demographic shifts are the equivalent of scouting reports before the next big game. There's also a generational angle. Younger audiences in both countries are digitally native, globally connected, and less tied to Cold War narratives. They stream highlights, debate on social media, and buy international brands without always thinking in geopolitical terms. To them, Seahawks versus Patriots is about rivalry, not ideology. Yet governments do think strategically. Super Bowl 2026 took place amid renewed tariff tensions and a recalibration of supply chains. Electric vehicle ads filled commercial breaks, reflecting America's push toward clean energy and manufacturing revival. But the batteries powering those vehicles often rely on materials processed in China. Energy transition, like sports dominance, depends on deep preparation and long-term investment. The United States still commands unmatched influence in global entertainment and financial systems. The dollar remains dominant. American universities lead research rankings. The NFL commands enormous domestic loyalty. China, however, commands unparalleled manufacturing depth, infrastructure scale, and a rapidly growing domestic market. It is investing heavily in advanced industries, including AI, green tech, and quantum computing. Super Bowl 60 did not settle any geopolitical contest. But it symbolized something important: competition and interdependence can coexist. On the field, the Seahawks outperformed the Patriots. Clean execution beat turnovers. In global affairs, outcomes are less clear. There is no final whistle in the US-China competition. There is no Lombardi Trophy for economic dominance. What exists instead is a long season. Trade negotiations are like regular season games, sometimes messy, sometimes strategic. Technology restrictions are like defensive schemes. Diplomatic summits resemble halftime adjustments. And just like in football, momentum shifts. Super Bowl 2026 reminded the world that America still knows how to put on a show. The pageantry, production quality, and sheer scale remain unmatched. But behind that show lies a global system in which China plays an integral role, whether as competitor, supplier, market, or rival. In the end, the real takeaway is this: the US and China are not simply opponents on opposite sidelines. They are more like teams sharing the same league, competing intensely, studying each other constantly, but operating within a shared global arena. The game in Santa Clara ended 29-13. Clear winner. Clear loser. The larger contest between China and the United States. Still very much in the fourth quarter, clock running, outcome uncertain.